Welcome back to our second panel discussion. Thank you, of course, to our previous speakers. It was some really inspiring movie, and to quote Mike, they're very emotional material about Antarctica. We're now going to talk about marine protection areas, a subject that is very close to a number of people's hearts, and we're privileged to have with us Lynn Goldsworthy. He's coming in from the University of Tasmania, and I'll introduce Lynn, if we could have her on the line. Good morning, Lynn. Thank you very much for being with us here at the Blue Water Summit. We have a small audience here at the Yacht Club and a much larger audience streaming. Now, we'll start off with that beautiful little piece of cinema that you sent me from Pew Research, and then we'll cut back to you to discuss issues about MPAs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to introduce the video. It's a video by Pew that was developed to advocate for one of the proposals that are on the table at the moment, the East Antarctic MPA. And I think it sets the scene very well for our ongoing discussion about how we get MPAs up in the Southern Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Surrounded by icy waters, whipped by wind, this harsh landscape doesn't seem like a suitable place for life. But tell that to this Adelie penguin, or the estimated 6 million others that call East Antarctica home, or to the legion of emperor penguins lined up for miles across the icy landmass, making their journey to sea. Diving underneath the ice reveals a thriving sea life that reminds us there is so much left of our ocean to explore. And explore is just what these Weddell seals are doing, carving new paths in the icy corridors, shaking the stillness with their song. The deeper you dive, the more diverse life is. Fluid fluttering of jellyfish tendrils give way to a field of sea feathers, where we witness the dogged determination of this large scallop. Dimensions are distorted in the Southern Ocean. A phenomenon called polar gigantism means that normally small animals are quite large. Like this sea spider, the size of a dinner plate. Expectations are challenged too. Familiar-looking species are found in an unfamiliar place. Plant-like creatures here are actually animals, and these animals make this part of the Southern Ocean look like a tropical reef. But surprisingly, most of the animals here are found nowhere else on Earth. For millions of years, this mosaic of marine life has been kept isolated from the outside world because of circumpolar currents. These powerful currents block warmer waters from entering and prevent Antarctic larvae from leaving the region, creating an environment that is truly one of a kind. And nutrient upwellings from the deep, cold bottom waters around Antarctica nourish faraway seas. So despite its isolation, we all depend on the Southern Ocean, and we all have an impact on it. Climate change, concentrated fishing, and other threats are taking a toll on this region, which is one of the fastest warming places on the planet. Climate change here means that ice sheets are changing, increasing the distance between penguins and their food source, one contributing factor to the massive chick die-offs in recent years. it's not just penguins that are in trouble. The Southern Ocean currents play a role in climate regulation, and disruptions to that could affect all of us. It's one of the many reasons the world needs to come together to safeguard the Southern Ocean. In 2018, the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, or CCAMLR, is considering 3 new marine protected areas, including one in the waters surrounding East Antarctica. A step that would help the region build resilience against climate change. The proposal would protect foraging and breeding grounds for these penguins and all other species that call this place home. It would also serve as a critical step toward fulfilling a bold promise CCAMLR made in 2011, to build a network of marine protected areas that will have impacts in this region and beyond. It's time to make good on that promise. It's time to protect East Antarctica and the Southern Ocean.
Thank you very much. I want to spend this time looking at the efforts made thus far to implement marine protected areas in the Southern Ocean, and then look at possible ways forward. There are so many reasons why a network of marine protected areas across the Southern Ocean is important, both regionally and globally, not least of which are for biodiversity protection. The preservation of endemic species and representative, unique and vulnerable ecosystems is critically important in a world experiencing rapid and devastating biodiversity and habitat loss. And this is even more so given Southern Ocean ecosystems are still relatively intact. Southern Ocean MPAs also play an important role as climate change reference areas, allowing research on the effects of climate change on regional habitat without the impact of local human activity. They're also very important as globally significant scientific reference areas. For example, for the study of the region's contribution in mitigating as well as exacerbating global climate change, or for identifying global distribution of human pollutants, such as microplastics, now found in the blubber of whales and seals, as well as the flesh of fish in the Antarctic, again, without the influences of local human activity. They can act as a globally significant carbon sink. For example, krill remove about 12 billion tonnes of carbon from the atmosphere annually. Their carbon-rich poop sinks and then locks up in the deep ocean. The sperm whales in the Southern Ocean are also thought to capture around 200,000 tonnes of carbon per year. Both the whale feces and the diving and moving of whales through the water encourage the development of more phytoplankton, which in turn removes more carbon from the atmosphere. The MPAs also contribute to global ocean health through nutrient circulation to other parts of the ocean, global ocean. And this in turn contributes to overall global food security. And they can help the planet breathe. The Southern Ocean is one place on Anthropocene Earth where humans have not yet permanently altered the environment. And whereas Tim told us, humans must respect and work with nature to survive. So it's pretty compelling, the need for setting aside large-scale limited fishing or no-take MPAs in the Antarctic. And combined with that, there is no artisanal or indigenous fishing in the Antarctic. The current fishery there is primarily focused on high-end catch and represents less than 1% of current global marine fisheries catch. And you could also argue that the use of Antarctic krill as a global sink could be more critical, or is more critical and rational, than using krill from the Antarctic as a food source. So what's the process for getting marine protected areas designated in the Southern Ocean. I think the most logical route is through CCAMLR, the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. This body assumed responsibility for managing the Southern Ocean in 1982, and in 2002 committed to adopt a network of representative marine protected areas across the entire convention area. CCAMLR is part of the Antarctic Treaty System. It's not a United Nations convention, and this is important when you start to look at options available for declaring marine protected areas in this region. It was negotiated as a conservation regime, which allows fishing, rather than as a fisheries regime, which prioritizes fishing. And this is important because the convention explicitly includes reference to the need for protection of areas for biodiversity and science. It manages more than 10% of the world's ocean, and so literally cannot be ignored. It has 26 decision-making members, including the European Union, and these include the world's most influential nations or groupings of nations, the USA, China, EU, Russia, for example. This is both good and bad, obviously, and particularly when linked to decision-making process within CCAMLR, which is consensus-based, meaning that all nations must agree to a proposal for it to be adopted. Or one nation can oppose a proposal and block it from being adopted. As I referenced earlier, the objective of the convention is the conservation of Antarctic marine living resources. It does include rational use, and one rational use is harvesting or fishing and associated activities, which is allowed if undertaken according to specified principles of conservation. These are the maintenance of healthy populations and ecosystem relationships and the avoidance of irreversible impact. Its responsibilities, however, extend way beyond fish species to the conservation of all other species of living organisms, including birds found south of the Antarctic convergence. They're also responsible for safeguarding the Antarctic environment and for protecting the integrity of its ecosystems. So what has CCAMLR done thus far with respect to marine protected areas? Well, quite a lot, in fact, at the level of setting the scene. What I mean by that is by generating the scientific basis and developing the process for determining and designating individual marine protected areas. And it has adopted 2 marine protected areas, one in 2009, 100,000 square kilometre area in the South Orkney Islands southern shelf, and the second one around 2 million square kilometres in 2016 in the Ross Sea area. Unfortunately, since 2016, not so much, hasn't done not that much at all. This map shows the current MPA efforts in CCAMLR. So the pale blue areas show the adopted MPAs, the Ross Sea MPA 2016 down here, and the much smaller South Orkney Islands Southern Shelf MPA. The mid-blue areas, these ones here, are MPAs designated by individual CCAMLR members within their national EEZs, and where those EEZs abut with or are within the CCAMLR area. They are still managed as EEZs, but they are within the CCAMLR convention area. And then the dark blue areas are the proposals that are under consideration. This is the East Antarctic, much reduced proposal, first proposed double the size of this
in 2011. This is the Weddell Sea MPA, first proposed in 2016. And this is the Domain 1 area around the peninsula that was first proposed in 2017. In reality, things have not just stalled, however, but they're going backwards. So we've clearly had no progress on proposals since 2016. We've also had no progress on the implementation of the 2 agreed marine protected areas. We have China and Russia now calling for a review of the commitment, consensus agreed commitment to the MPA network. And we have Russia demanding a consensus agreed definition of marine protected area before they will even consider reviewing and accepting any further MPAs. So what are the impediments? What's the problem? I think fundamentally it's a combination of fishing interests and aspirations, particularly of China and Russia, combined with the consensus decision-making process of the Commission, which allows one member to veto a proposal, even if that proposal is supported by a majority or a vast majority. And if you look at the proposals, the Domain 1 MPA coincides with the current krill fishery, and China has indicated its desire to significantly ramp up by up to 5 million tonnes its krill fishery in that area there. And the East Antarctic MPA area overlaps with an area where a krill catch limit has been set, although there's no krill fishing there at the moment. And again, China has aspirations of krill fishing in that space and doesn't want it blocked off. And then in the Weddell Sea, there's no significant fishing going on in this region at the moment, but Russia has indicated that they will not support it being closed off until they have investigated for potential target species, most likely icefish or potentially toothfish. Of course, it's not quite so simple as that. It's a little bit more complex. At the global level, China wants to be a major player in high seas fisheries. And the Southern Ocean is the only high seas area not completely subscribed or overfished. To progress their aspiration in the Southern Ocean, they want the convention to be seen as a fisheries regime that prioritizes fishing rather than as a conservation regime. And this is important because regional fisheries management organizations only have the authority to declare fisheries management closures. They can only close areas for fisheries management reasons. So they can't close an area or create a marine protected area for representative biodiversity protection or for climate resilience or for science, for example, all of which CCAMLR can currently do and all of which we are wanting. I believe that CCAMLR still remains the most likely organisation to deliver an MPA system. We already have the baseline there, but we need to do more than just lobby for MPA designation within the CCAMLR Commission. I think that we need CCAMLR members to take a conscious and deliberate decision to reverse CCAMLR's slow default decline into RFO, Regional Fisheries Organisation status, and to also collectively reaffirm their commitment to the conservation objective as it was envisaged by its negotiators in the late 1970s. And if that cannot or does not happen, then on the basis of a failure by CCAMLR and its members to achieve its objective, its conservation objective, then we need to push other bodies to play a much larger role in ensuring large-scale spatial protection in the region. So this could be the Antarctic Treaty, it could be the United Nations High Seas Protected Area process, or it possibly could be the Convention on Biological Diversity. And they could do this either by placing pressure on CCAMLR to act or by threatening or enacting independent action themselves. For myself, I actually dream of CCAMLR members going further. I dream of them recognising the global values of the Southern Ocean and becoming custodians of those global values, the biodiversity protection, the globally significant science, the global carbon sink, the planetary breathing space, the only place on Earth dedicated to peace and scientific cooperation, for example. So how do we get to where we need to go? Two suggestions I would have at this stage to start. One is CCAMLR member leadership. We need members in CCAMLR to step up as leaders to address the veto behaviour, to stop Russia from pushing non-scientific evidence-based decisions, to address the attacks on the CCAMLR norms and practices which have served CCAMLR so well in the last 40 years. We need CCAMLR member leaders to ensure that marine protected areas remain on the table in their original state rather than being constantly whittled down. And we need CCAMLR members to force other CCAMLR members to make a conscious decision on the direction of CCAMLR. Do you want to be a fisheries regime or do you want to be a conservation regime? I think the second thing that we need to start with now is a role for citizens. Of course, we need to continue and to build pressure on CCAMLR members and on CCAMLR itself to encourage nations to take that leadership role and to ensure that marine protected areas stay on the table. I think that citizens can encourage Antarctic Treaty intervention on CCAMLR's failures, either to act or they could decide to act themselves on MPAs, and they have the legal capacity to do that. Citizens can also encourage external concern and pressure around CCAMLR's failure to act. So they can encourage both other international organisations to put pressure on CCAMLR to act or to take independent action. I have to say that I haven't worked all of this out, and I'm sure there are a lot more ideas and processes and things that we can do to make this happen. But and I don't even know whether this approach will work, but I do believe very strongly that Southern Ocean marine protected areas will not emerge without radical rethinking on the pressure points. They need to extend beyond CCAMLR itself. Thank you very much for listening, and I really look forward to our discussions today.
Thank you, Lynn. It's great to virtually share the stage with you. Anyway, Lynn is a real authority on MPAs and on CCAMLR more broadly, as you may have gathered. I worked together with Pew in a voluntary capacity advocating for the establishment of the East Antarctic Marine Protected Area, and Lynn is a real authority that everybody turns to for guidance on how to navigate this whole space. I suppose my relationship, I'm not going to speak for long, just 5 or 6 minutes, but my relationship with the East Antarctic Marine Protected Area, and indeed the other two that are up for negotiation, which is the Weddell Sea one and the Antarctic Peninsula one, if you want to look at it in those terms, stems from my long relationship with the Antarctic. I've been going there for 25 years, which when you put it in those terms is a long time. I've been 12 times, but many of the times I've been there have been for long duration expeditions with a bit of science thrown in. I did retrace the journey of Douglas Mawson a few years ago to sort of celebrate the great achievement of Mawson, who was a scientist foremost and really an explorer second, but also to test whether he needed to cannibalise the second guy who died in his arms in order to make the expedition that had all gone wrong possible. I travelled with an increasingly nervous Russian who was very pleased to discover it could indeed be done without the need to eat the other guy, so that was that bit of history. But look, my interest in Antarctica is at a whole series of different levels. I'm an environmental scientist. I am, as I say, the ambassador for WWF in this country. And I enjoy the remoteness of the Antarctic as a place that hasn't been subjugated by people. There's some of the cleanest, most pristine oceans in the world down there, even though microplastics have indeed made their way down to even those waters. Home to around 9,000 different species, the Antarctic waters. They really are this incredibly rich, biodiverse, rich habitat that we need to be very, very mindful of trying to protect. I think we've got two existential threats, and I don't want to go over the same ground as Lynn, but I think the first one is the degradation of ecosystems down there, and that can be everything from pollution in the water to physical catching of krill and things like Patagonian toothfish, which are very, very have a very long, slow breeding cycle. And the other one, of course, is climate change. In terms of the first one, many of the early explorers, as I say, when Antarctica was first discovered in 1820, it was really either the Brit Bransfield, the Russian Bellingshausen, or indeed Nathaniel Palmer, the American, who first sort of sighted it in 1820. And Palmer, of course, was a sealer. He was only there, wasn't interested in planting a flag. He was interested in harvesting the ocean for seals. And that relationship began with sealing in the early 1800s through to about the 1830s, when we completely exhausted the seal populations, through to whaling that occurred all the way up to around the 1920s, 1930s. These, interestingly, they're digesters on Macquarie Island. And when we ran out of seals and whales, we used to chuck penguins in those and render them down, light a fire underneath and render down the oil to get the subcutaneous fat that each penguin contained. And of course, the penguins now are blissfully unaware of this and sort of mill around these digesters, unaware that their forebears might have ended up in the kiln, in the pot. But look, Macquarie is a fascinating place, of course. It is now a wildlife sanctuary, and it was Douglas Mawson, in fact, in 1933 who got it designated as such. So Australia has a long and very proud tradition of conservation in Antarctica, which is why we have such an important role to play, all the way back from things like the work of Mawson, all the way through to Bob Hawke, who in fact is a South Australian, who said, we're not going to allow mining or defence-based activity in Antarctica. And it was actually him who was instrumental in ensuring the Antarctic Treaty didn't allow for mining or defence-based activity in Antarctica. Going over kind of what Lynn has said, I mean, the big fear today is not necessarily, certainly not seals anymore, we don't take them. Some whaling still occurs, but very limited amounts. I think the big fear is really krill, because krill are this little crustacean that form the basis of the food web, as was mentioned in the Pew film. I think the big worry, the figures I have, everybody's figures slightly differ as to what is being taken, but there's about 380 million tonnes of krill in the ocean. I think the catch at the moment is only several 100,000 tonnes, but that's the stuff we know about. The IUU, the illegal, unregulated and unreported krill harvest, could be many multiples higher than that official figure. And that's the thing that is really worrying for us. And as Lynn said before, krill are great sequesters of CO2 in addition to forming the basis of the food web. The other threat, which is really my bag, I'm really involved a lot in the climate science these days, is climate change. And I went down to Antarctica most recently in November through to January, down to the Antarctic Peninsula on the left-hand side there. And the temperatures there have risen 3.2 degrees Celsius in the last 60 years. In fact, I didn't have a single day below zero in the 2 months I was there, to give you some indication. You go further south in Antarctica, of course, it gets far colder. But in that part, the temperatures were not below freezing in the 2 months I was there, which is really pretty frightening. The eastern part of Antarctica is ironically a little bit colder due to the changes in SAM, the southern annular mode, which is the way the ocean circulation works. But that's kind of, I don't want to call it an anomaly, but suffice to say we have enough ice in the western part of Antarctica to raise sea levels on their own by 7 metres. So we're very concerned about the climate change happening there. And the scale, as I mentioned in my earlier presentation, is huge. Antarctica is twice the size of Australia, as I mentioned, but even icebergs and some of the ice shelves that are breaking off are vast. This is the remnants of B-15, which is the largest iceberg to break off Antarctica that I saw in 2006. When it first broke off, it was 295 kilometres long by 37 kilometres wide and several hundred metres thick. So this is a large piece of real estate. Poor old Singapore gets it in the neck again because it's 15 times the size of Singapore. Sorry about that, Singapore. But you know, the scale of what we're dealing with down there is vast. Interestingly, krill, and this is one, sit at the absolute nexus of this issue. They are not only critical to the biodiversity of Antarctica and form the basis of the food web down there, but as Lynn mentioned, they are great sequestrers of CO2. When they either die or excrete waste matter, it goes down to the deep ocean where that carbon is essentially locked up. And the figures I have that I often cite are that krill on a daily basis sequester the same amount of CO2 as the UK produces through all its industry and energy generation. So they really are major sequestrers of CO2. So they're important for two very fundamental reasons. CCAMLR, Lynn has given us a very exhaustive rundown, so I don't propose to, but I'm not happy with it. Set up in 1982. As part of Australia's proud tradition, it's hosted here. So in fact, it's the only international environment convention that we host. It's becoming a bit of a glorified fishing treaty, really, where the catch limits are set very low to get conservation outcomes. So its conservation teeth are not really sharp enough. They're too slow, and they are consensus-driven. And guess what? Two of the members are Russia and China. So it doesn't matter how much we all go around patting ourselves on the back about progress being made amongst the rest of the world. If you can't get those two countries over the line with all of their vested interests in politics, then you're going to go nowhere. So we need to really rethink about how we get outcomes that don't involve this very clumsy, frankly fairly tiresome consensus-based approach to it. So there are many things that I'm unhappy about. It does get some good outcomes. Many of the people involved are very highly credible diplomats and politicians. There's a lot of goodwill, but we're just not getting the outcomes fast enough. In terms of the outcomes we have got, as Lynn mentioned, there's two red ticks on this map. You can see they're the two MPAs that we have got over the line. The South Orkneys is the one at the top there. That's 94,000 square kilometres, I believe, and the Ross Sea is about 1.5 million square kilometres. The stuff that's not on that map are the ones that individual countries have basically got over the line. They include South Georgia from the Brits, Prince Edward Island, which is sort of south of South Africa, that's run by the South Africans, Kerguelen Island and its marine protected area, which is the French, and Heard and McDonald, which is down to us. But when you add those four countries' MPAs plus the two that we've collectively got over the line, which is Ross and the South Orkneys at the top, we've only got 13% of the 35 million square kilometres that form the remit of CCAMLR over the line. If you take out the ones that the individual countries have done, we've only actually agreed on 5% protection, and yet we all agreed we protect the whole lot. So we're really kind of dragging our heels. In terms of my involvement, it's been related to helping Pew, whose video you saw at the beginning of Lynn's presentation, try and lobby to get the East Antarctic Marine Protected Area over the line. It would be the second biggest after the Ross, about 1 million square kilometres, and it's now broken up into three areas: Dragalski, D'Urville and Mac Robertson. It was formerly one continuous zone, but it's been a little bit watered down. But nevertheless, if we can get that over the line, it will be absolutely huge. You know, I lobbied very successfully and found a very receptive audience in Maurice Payne and Susan Lee, who were the Foreign Minister and Environment Minister respectively in the former government, and they were highly supportive. Australia and 23 other members of CCAMLR are highly supportive. The difficulty, of course, on the international scale is you need consensus, and that involves also getting China and Russia over the line. Do we need to defer to a different authority other than CCAMLR or strengthen CCAMLR in order to enable it to find a way to politically navigate these waters to get Russia and China to engage rather than through the mechanics of CCAMLR? That's the big question. That's the big question. Thank you.
We'll get Lynn back on the line, and then we can have a little bit of. But thank you, Tim. You're very restrained, Tim. I thought we may be able to be a little bit more. What can I say? Activist.
Well, I mean, you know, you can be. Look, it's difficult. I'm a simple person, right? Expeditions are simple things. They're about getting to the top of something or the other side of something and achieving an outcome. And you put in place what's needed to achieve that outcome in a known time frame. That's it. Money, people, resources, know-how. Wearing my other hat, you go to these international dialogues and everybody's there on business class flights, drinking their water out of single-use plastic bottles, talking about the importance of not releasing carbon and using single-use plastic bottles and doing absolutely nothing. And, you know, frankly, you get extremely tired of it. And at a personal level, I find it, you know, pretty pathetic, really. But at a professional level, you need to continue to engage. And as I say, that's not directed at the people of CCAMLR. There are many very good people involved. But collectively, the process, if you look at it from the macro scale, isn't getting the job done.
Lynn, you need to unmute, please. You're on mute, so we're not hearing you.
Yeah.
Okay. Coming through.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, as a long-term activist, that it can be sometimes very frustrating. I want to say one thing about CCAMLR. It's had, it gives out bottles for everyone to use to save the single-use plastic, and they're metal bottles. And most of us take the same bottle back every year, and that's been going on for about 12 years. So they have done that tiny little thing. They also no longer print out vast quantities of paper. It's all electronic, so that's a tiny little thing. But I think the thing with being an activist is that at some point, the decision needs to be made to deliver what it is that you want, the MPAs. And so that usually involves, you know, law. It involves a government or an international body. And so at some stage, you have to play in that field as well. So being an activist actually involves more than just getting an issue on the table and keeping the pressure on. So that's just my little comment.
Yeah, and I don't envy anyone, particularly with the two people you're negotiating with, the Russians and the Chinese, who have proven themselves in many capacities to be unresponsive to a lot of world pressure. But I believe that from all of us, we need to engage with our local governments, and I think work a hierarchical basis, because if Bob Hawke made that decision, I wasn't aware of that. It just goes to show that if people can get our electorates, and our electorates can get to our members, and our members can get to their counterparts internationally, we may be able to keep this whole process alive.
Can I make a comment?
In a small scale, Tim and I earlier on this, or late last year, we had a discussion where perhaps some of these MPAs, rather, whilst still understanding that there's definitions are required, perhaps we could just make them no fishing zones for a period of time. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it is perfectly possible to stop fishing from going ahead in certain areas because CAMLR requires consensus to approve a fishing proposal. It won't necessarily give you the broader protection that we want in an MPA, as in, climate resilience, etc. But we could stop fishing in some spaces. The difficulty that a number of CAMLR member countries have is that if a fishing notification has gone through all the hoops that it's supposed to go through, and it meets all the scientific requirements, etc., then they feel it's bad faith to say no. The trouble is, of course, that China and Russia are not playing good faith either. So, so at some stage, someone actually has to step up and have play leadership. I think. I'll stop there.
I think the strength with a consensus-based approach is if the situation is the way you want it, then consensus protects it because it stops it easily being changed. The difficulty is the situation is not the way we want it, and it is difficult for us to change it to the way we want it because consensus is actually hindering our ability to do that. I'm sort of not suggesting we do away with consensus, but the question I think is probably aimed at Lynn is whether CAMLR represents the right international dialogue in which to make these sort of determinations. If it's not, who is? Because we certainly need progress in this area. The Australian government, if I can say so, the former Australian government, were very, very supportive of all the work, and my role really, together with Pew and many other people, was just to keep it on the agenda at CAMLR, especially during COVID, when it became a virtual conference with a reduced scope of work. But the bigger issue is, who's going to regulate the big players, the big international players?
Yeah, I think, as I tried to say, the proponents of the existing marine protected areas in CAMLR, and in fact, pretty much everyone other than China and Russia, a couple of other countries are very quiet, but I don't think they'll block consensus. Pretty much everyone fully supports the MPAs, including the three that are on the table at the moment, which is why I was suggesting that we need to go beyond just lobbying our current members to maintain the MPA. I think there are a couple of things there. One is that often a country will fully support an MPA, but what Russia or China will do, particularly Russia, will play a game where they will propose to block a fisheries proposal unless no progress is made on an MPA. And most countries that are proponents of MPAs are also fishing nations. So we actually need to get them to think about which is more important here. Is it one vessel going down to fish for a high-end fishery, or is it global ocean health and the global values that MPAs put up? And that's actually a really difficult question. The second comment I would make is that consensus has worked really well for CAMLR, and it's why we have so many very good measures within CAMLR at the moment. What we have now is not consensus. What we have now is veto. We have a situation where a country will say no, whereas what they're meant to do is say, we don't like that proposal, here is an alternative. Or how can we work to find something that we both agree on? And we actually have China and Russia sitting back and saying, we don't like that, you fix it. And I think that it's up to the other CAMLR members to stop tolerating that behaviour. And then the third comment is, which is why I mentioned pressure and from other organisations. I actually believe that CAMLR has the best structural process for delivering the best MPAs if we can get around the problem that we have at the moment, because I think that if it goes to United Nations, they will be watered down. However, a watered down network of MPAs is considerably better than no MPAs. So I think that there is quite an interesting game that I think we all need to play at the moment, which is getting the other organizations like the CBD, like the UN High Seas MPA discussions to actually start pressuring Camara to do something about it. And if they don't do anything about it, then take over.
Thank you. On the other hand, or the other scale, we have my good friend Paul Watson with Sea Shepherd, who has been instrumental in reducing the quantity of whaling going on in the Southern Ocean, and perhaps maybe there is still some need for just plain old protest to keep getting this message across. But I think, Linda, I'm very privileged and pleased that you could join us. Linda Goldsworth has just completed her PhD on this subject, so I believe we have no better panelist to describe how these things can and should happen. So thank you very much for your comments,
Thank you.
Linda, and I look forward to having more dialogue with you through the Blue Water Summit. And to Tim, thank you very much as well. We'll draw this session to a close, and there'll be about a 10-minute break, and then we'll move on to our further session, which is on hunting and harvesting. So thank you very much.
Off Australia's northwest coast, at the meeting point of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, lie two globally significant and spectacular marine environments. Christmas Island and the Cocos Keeling Islands in Australia's Indian Ocean territories are places where unique species live and thrive. These waters provide habitats for a range of marine life, including distinct varieties of coral, sea turtles, whale sharks and oceanic fish. To protect this remarkable marine environment, the Australian government has created 2 new marine parks surrounding the Christmas Island and the Cocos Keeling Islands. At 744,000 square kilometres in size, these 2 marine parks together cover an area more than twice the size of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. These parks will fully protect offshore waters and support the sustainable use of inshore waters for future generations, allowing activities such as fishing, diving and boating, all key to island life. Importantly, the new marine parks will support vital industries like nature-based tourism. Vast, remote and relatively uncharted, they will also support valuable marine research. They extend Australia's national marine park network, which now protects 45% of our waters. Australia's new Indian Ocean Territory marine parks are an untouched national treasure. Now they are protected, they will remain that way for generations to come.